Okay, so hello everyone. As Gail said, my name is Leigh Chalmers and I am the Heritage Inclusion Manager at Wessex Archaeology. And this means it's my job to make archaeology and heritage more accessible and inclusive for people who may be struggling to engage with the subject. So Phil and I are here this evening to talk to you about our project Digging for Erlestoke. That's Erlestoke Prison, which is a Category C men's prison in North Wiltshire. Our talk's going to be in two parts. We're going to do a bit of a tag team. I'm going to tell you about the project and Phil will tell you about the archaeology, which feels like a kind of fair division of labour here. To set the scene, though, I'm going to share with you the 3-minute introductory film, the concept of which was created by two of the men from the prison. So they filmed the section that you're going to see that's in black and white, and then Tom, our videographer at Wessex, created the final piece.
Like, when you first come to prison, it can be very lonely. The doors close and you think, so what now?
The door can be locked like 23 hours a day. You're lucky to get a job in some prisons.
The public have this view that we're like all legs and that we're useless, lock them up and forget about anything.
A lot of prisoners suffer mental health. They're not all bad people, they've just done bad things.
When I first arrived at Erlestoke, I thought, this is a place that is actually trying to change things.
Wessex Archaeology coming and working with us, I think is great. Well, sitting myself, I believe it's a great opportunity. Great for men to get involved in anyway.
I mean, the lack of professionals, they'll be mixing with us, building friendships and relationships whilst we discover the past in our grounds. I never was expecting that.
They tend to have a sense of ownership, a sense of place, like you would get in any other community. You can't help but kind of question your own opinions and attitudes and prejudices surrounding, people who've been inside, the whole thing. It's think about it all the time, to be honest.
It has been amazing, really, to work with people that is discovering archaeology. All the archaeology can give you is really nice. It's really nice.
And just to say, everybody, the link to the longer film, which is a 30-minute film, will go into the chat at the end of our presentation this evening. So how did this project come about, as it's not every day that community digs take place in prisons? Well, this isn't my first rodeo, and prior to working at Wessex, I had led a couple of projects at the prison in 2017 and 2018, so I did have some idea of the importance of engaging prisoners with external opportunities and the difference that this can make to the rhythm of their day, to their mindset, and to their well-being. And as someone who works for an archaeological company that's a registered charity and whose mission it is to engage with communities in the broadest sense, I felt very confident that as an organisation delivering a project for a prison community really does speak directly to our values around uncovering the past to build a better world where archaeology is inclusive. So quite simply, I pitched the project idea to Elizabeth Williams. Now, Elizabeth is the education manager at the prison, and she said, yes, immediately without any hesitation. It really was that simple a conversation. I'm going to stop here and just give Elizabeth a little bit of credit because she is the one who took the risk in saying yes to our project, whereas we were just doing what we do every day. It just happened to be in a very different setting. All of these conversations were taking place before we knew that there actually had been a dig at the prison site in 1963. So in 1963, the prison was then a young offenders institute, and archaeologist Grant King and a small team of boys carried out a series of excavations that lasted just a week, but actually discovered a substantial amount of archaeology. This included some of the objects that you can see on the screen here, so Roman pottery, a comb and a leather glove. And when I hand over to Phil, he will be able to provide a little bit of context around the types of objects we found. The objects that you can see on screen from the 63 dig are currently stored in the archives at the Wiltshire Museum and Devizes. 60 years on, though, our project was pitched slightly differently to that of the 63 dig, because we were prioritising the experience we wanted the men to have over the archaeology we hoped to find, although obviously we did hope to find something. Our project was designed more to give men access to archaeology in all of its disciplines, to improve well-being, to give the men skills and experiences they could use within the prison and outside upon release, to provide educational and creative opportunities to expand the reach of the project, and to potentially feed into the men's rehabilitation as a restorative experience too. We've been incredibly lucky and we're so grateful to have the support and investment of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who have funded the project pretty much in its entirety. And next to the lottery logo that you can see on the screen is a picture of a cake. This is a dig cake, and that was made for us by the kitchen team at the prison when we had our exhibition and celebration day in the prison. Celebrating the end of the project is something that's really important to us, and we do that in all of our heritage inclusion projects, just to take a moment to say thank you and well done to everyone that's involved in the work. So what did we do? Well, as you might imagine, I had many, many ambitions for the project, but I'm going to share two of them with you now. The first one was that we gave the men the full experience of what working on an archaeological project means in all of its disciplines. And the second one was that as many Wessex Archaeology staff as possible were involved in the delivery of the work, that we could work across teams and provide the men with access to as many experts as a result. And here on the slide, you can see some of my colleagues working away and sharing their knowledge and skills, and some of them are happier than others to be there. You can see Phil in the corner with his arms folded. 34 experts helped to deliver the work from within 14 teams at Wessex, and plus we had the support of some external experts too. So this led on to the experiences the men had. What did we share with them? And this is a list of all of the sessions that we held in the prison, 75 sessions in total over a period of 18 months. As you can imagine, when the project was announced, everyone wanted to join the dig, but we actually knew for numerous reasons this wouldn't be possible. The group of men who took part in the dig had security clearance, and those who didn't get clearance were naturally very disappointed. So when I put together the programme, I made sure that it involved sessions that took place both in the inside and outside spaces within the prison. It was really important to me that the men experienced everything in real time and in the right order as they would do on a commercial dig. So as you can see from this list, we started right at the very beginning of the process with the desk-based research, where we worked with the men to understand and research the heritage of the site. This was followed by a series of workshops that included an ecology survey led by the team from Dipper Ecology and ground penetrating radar on site in preparation for the dig. We also had a health and safety workshop, which writing risk assessments and health and safety isn't really my favourite thing to do, but it was important for the men to understand that so they could contribute to the risk assessment for the dig site. And actually, this was a very significant session, I think, because many men, when they leave prison, will actually go on to jobs in construction or they'll try and set up on their own. So this session actually attracted new men to the project as it was so useful to them. As well as following the process of running the project as though it was a commercial dig, I also wanted to expose the men to some of the other teams that work at Wessex. So I programmed in a series of talks, including talks about Stonehenge, geoarchaeology, and marine archaeology. We even took the VR headset in so the men could see what it felt like to be under the sea looking at the Fairley Barracuda. The men really, really enjoyed the VR experience. I remember one guy in the headset was actually moving his arms as though he was swimming under the water. Getting our equipment through security and into the prison each time was a never-ending joy, I'm sure you can imagine. And I think I wrote over 50 authority to convey request forms. There was a lot of excitement when we took the VR headset in, and slightly less excitement when we took in the spades and mattocks. So as well as the archaeology, we were able to bring in other elements for the men to get involved in. So my mantra throughout this whole process is, if this is something that the men can do, then they should be the ones doing it. And this included writing the article for British Archaeology magazine. For those of you who haven't seen the article, it's really inclusive, as it includes the experiences of the men. So what you read in the magazine was written by them, as well as pieces of writing by members of Wessex Archaeology staff and prison staff. So just a huge thanks to CBA for giving us the opportunity to tell the story of the project in this way. And the other thing about it is that something like this is a tangible thing that the men can share with pride with friends and family, and that really makes a real difference to them. We also had finds illustration sessions led by my colleague Nancy Dixon that led on to the most wonderful project in the art room. The art project became quite a significant part of the whole project. We had 5 sessions which were delivered either side of Christmas, and they presented the men with the opportunity to look closely at the objects they'd discovered, which only strengthened the connections that they felt to the objects that they'd found. The men worked to develop a series of beautiful paintings. The mixed class included the art group and the men who had been digging, and as they learnt from each other, a wonderful and supportive group began to emerge. Half of the men had never been in the art room before, so were uncertain about what to do or how to use some of the art materials, but each week they embraced new ways of working and were surprised by their outcomes. The men also curated an exhibition, which we've been lucky enough to display in the visitors' hall inside the prison so that visiting friends and family could see it, and at the Wiltshire Museum in Devizes. And this summer, it'll form part of an exhibition about community arts that will be on display in the Young Gallery in Salisbury. I'd like to draw your attention to the quote on screen. This is something that I said to our evaluators about halfway through the project, when some of the impact we were having had started to become clear. So I said, ownership is a powerful thing. It makes you feel valued and it gives you a voice, a sense of belonging. I wanted the men to be part of our team and to understand that archaeology is more than putting a spade in the ground. I wanted them to feel like this was their project and we were just facilitating it. So the exhibition was actually designed to go back into the prison, where it now resides in a wide corridor in the education building overlooking the dig site. It was really important to us that the exhibition and the artefacts were returned to the prison, and that as part of the legacy of the project, the men involved have created their own mini museum and exhibition that they have absolute ownership of. And as an aside, the beautiful oak display cabinet was also designed and built by one of the prisoners. So all of these opportunities, all 75 of them, have given the men taking part a better understanding of the archaeological process, how they complement each other, and how they all fit together to give that broad and complete view of an archaeological dig in its entirety. They understand that it's not just digging, although obviously for them that was the standout moment in the project. So we spent 5 days a week for 4 weeks in total digging 17 test pits. A group of 8 men, who became known as the dig team, arrived promptly at 8:30 every morning, and at 4:30 in the afternoon, my colleagues would physically have to usher the men off site because they didn't want to leave. The skills the men learnt during those 4 weeks were many, and as you can see from the quote, in the second week my colleagues said to me, these guys could do a dig on their own. They're marking out test pits on their own, they're recording them accurately, they're using all of the correct terminology. They learnt that method really quickly. I have to tell you that the men were like sponges, and they absorbed absolutely every tiny bit of knowledge and information passed on to them from my colleagues who were leading the dig. They took this information and learning back to the wing each night and were able to share their stories of the day with other prisoners. The experience the men had in the field, that sense of being part of something bigger, something important, of belonging to a team and being valued and treated as an equal, had a tremendous impact on their well-being. Outside of the prison, we've engaged with the local community and the wider community. We've had a very positive piece in the Times, and we appeared on Times Radio. We had a really strange experience with BBC Southwest, where they kind of managed to miss the point of the project in its entirety. But we also had a wonderful community day at Found Outdoors, who own a piece of woodland just down the road from the prison. And on the slide here, you can see members of that community who were so interested to come along and find out about the archaeology of their home, of where they lived as well. We've also delivered sessions at the local primary school and to the Scouts. My colleague Ruth created a lovely resource pack for the school, and we gifted them a tool bag full of exciting bits that linked directly to the curriculum. And the word search that you can see on the screen was compiled by one of the men. He put this together in the evenings when he was in his cell. And as you can imagine, he's really delighted that this is part of the final resource. So like all good projects, evaluation and understanding the impact and the difference we made was important to us. We worked with an excellent team of external evaluators, Scott Sullivan and Kath Daly from Resources for Change, and we spent time right at the start of the project thinking about and identifying the outcomes and the impacts for the men, their friends and family, the prison, Wessex Archaeology, the wider community, and any archaeology we might find. And from this, the evaluators were able to create an evaluation framework from which we could get our information. So the impacts we were looking for were the men to feel connected to something bigger, leading to a positive change in attitude and actions within custody and beyond. That friends and family would feel more connected to their men in custody, sharing pride and positive memories together. The Erlestoke prison is recognised as a place where men are supported with their rehabilitation in innovative ways that benefit society at large. That for us at Wessex, that we are recognised as an organisation that connects people in the past innovatively, drawing on the full range of expertise and experience in ways that realise meaningful social change. For the wider community to better understand the role of prisons as places of rehabilitation where positive changes are possible, and that the archaeology at Erlestoke is better understood, enabling ongoing opportunities for learning and connections. So that's quite substantial, isn't it? But they are the impacts. That was the end game. That's what we were hoping to achieve during the project. And the evidence tells us that we did make a difference, that there was improvement in the well-being of the men who took part, and that, yes, we achieved all of those desired impacts. I was speaking with my friend David Kendall the other week about our project. Now, for many years, David has been working in prisons. He delivers lots of literary festivals, and he does a lot of work at Erlestoke. And I wanted to try and unpick with David what I felt the project has achieved, because I knew I'd seen a change in the mindset of the men who'd taken part. 3 of the men who were released told me that they were going to look for archaeological volunteering opportunities when they got out, which was great. But I wasn't sure about the long-lasting effects of the men who were still inside, who were serving much longer sentences. And David said to me that what we had delivered in Erlestoke prison, our whole 18-month programme of activity, is so unusual and something that almost never happens in prisons. And that for the men, our project will have been about the relationships and the way that we made them feel at that moment. So for those men who took part, who have years ahead of them inside prison, the important thing is that our project happened and that they were able to be a part of it. That thinking about the past, not their past, reminds them about who they want to be in the future. So along with Elizabeth and her colleagues at the prison, 34 members of Wessex staff have helped to make all of this possible. Now, folks, confession time, I'm not an archaeologist. I merely coordinated the project, and it was my fantastic colleagues at Wessex who brought this project to life by sharing their expertise and knowledge for the benefit of others. And I had just one ask of my colleagues, and that was that they meet the men where they are now without judgment, that they treated them with respect and kindness, and that they were supportive of them, and that we wanted to enable the men to thrive. There was never any doubt that that would happen, and as such, the positive impacts on the project were not just on the prisoners, but actually on my colleagues as well. It's had a really, really big impact on everybody who's taken part. So I'm going to finish my section with this quote from the final project evaluation report. I think it's a perfect summary of the project, and if you forgive me, I'm just going to read from the slide one more time. So at its heart, Digging for Erlestoke is an inspiration example of key individuals driven by values, choosing to attempt something difficult and even unpopular for some. The project did not need to happen. With no drivers for a project intervention beyond the compassion of the people who wanted to make it happen, it offered something to a cohort of men who embraced the opportunity to find purpose and fulfilment in a challenging situation whilst furthering archaeological knowledge. Digging for Erlestoke is a values-driven human project that should be celebrated on those terms. Judging it by the usual yardsticks of a heritage project simply do not do the project justice. Strip away the frameworks, priorities and processes that govern funded projects, and we can see a simple example of heritage with humanity. And that's all we were striving for in our project, heritage with humanity, treating the men with kindness and presenting them with an opportunity that they might not have otherwise had. So that's the end of my bit. Phil and I are going to do a little bit of a dance now where we're going to swap seats, and Phil's going to take over and he's going to tell you all about the archaeology we found, because I know that that's going to be of great interest to you.
Right. Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be here and to be sharing this event with you. Now, the archaeology. So, I guess the first thing that I have to introduce you to is the site. Because chances are there ain't many of you that will have been to Erlestoke Prison. This is what we see. On the top left-hand side, you'll see an aerial photograph of Erlestoke in 1945. And at the bottom left, you will see Erlestoke House. Erlestoke Prison is based around the grounds of this rather stately 18th century mansion. And you can see from the print what it looked like. And if I move the mouse up, you can actually see a range of protruding here, it comes along and it comes back here. You can see these protruding ranges here. So the view that you're looking at here is basically this one here. In 1945, the grounds were used as an officer training establishment, and in 1950 the house burnt down, and it's been redeveloped, as you see now in the aerial photograph of 2024. But you can still see the imprint of that 18th century mansion with the two protruding ranges here. This bit here is now the education block. It's the only bit that survives from that 18th century mansion. The site itself is a ridge running this way of Upper Greensand. If we go off the top of the image, you go down, drop down into a clay vale, and if you move south off the bottom edge of the screen, you bump into the chalk escarpment of Salisbury Plain. So that gives you some idea of the geographical and geological outline of the place. So if we then start to look at where the archaeology is, we can actually home in a bit more detail on the facilities themselves. You can see the imprint of the old 18th century house shows up very, very clearly. And if I then impose that on the top of it, you can see off to the right here where Dennis Grant King did his preliminary excavations in the 1960s. What they did find was that this ground here was very, very heavily disturbed. There was Romano-British and Iron Age archaeology here, ditches and pits and post holes, and ultimately 8 inhumation burials. Our bit is this bit outlined in the red. And I know you've seen the photograph before, but I couldn't resist putting in this one in the top left-hand corner, which does actually demonstrate, for those of you who've been on an excavation, the chances are that you haven't been on an excavation in quite those circumstances where you are surrounded by an impenetrable fence with barbed wire and a razor wire on the top. It is quite a formidable location to do a dig. I've certainly never ever done anything under those circumstances before. So as Leigh said, part of the excavation, like you would do normally on an excavation, is you do preliminary geophysics work. And here we can see the plot of the geophysics. The area here in grey was heavily disturbed. That's towards where the old building was. And here we have this sort of figure of 8 pair of spectacles, as you might call it, listed under geophysics as possible archaeology. And so we had to explain to the men at the time where we and why we would put trenches across those features to try and clarify what they were. As it was, they were not archaeology at all. But the main thrust of the excavation was this scatter of test pits that we put in this part of the excavation round there. So we have to accept that, of course, these people have never done archaeological excavations before. Some of them have done work in the gardens as gardeners in the horticultural thing, but none of them have actually done the disciplines of working clean, chopping down sections, sieving, looking for artifacts, and thinking about where these artifacts are coming from. So this is all brand new stuff which I have to instill into them. It's all part of that training, and anybody who's been on an excavation will know we all have to learn this. And so once you've actually established those sorts of lessons, you then start to go into the more detailed stuff that you have to create an archive. You have to record this material. In the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a typical photograph of the sort of archaeology, the sections that typified all our test pits. But the important thing was that these guys had to do section recording. And for most people who've done it a lot, it becomes an acceptable skill. It's not a problem. But if it's the first time that you do it, it can actually be quite daunting. That process of setting up a horizontal string, measuring down, measuring along, and then scaling that onto a grid pattern. Now, like I say, it is a skill that you develop, but you have to remember that these guys, they've probably been in prison most of their lives. And even if they learned this before they went into prison, that they would probably forget it. And so the fact is that they did absorb these skills, and you can see they've produced section drawings that are perfectly accurate. They're all labelled, they've all been checked. They do form part of that dig archive. It will be usable in the future. So what do we actually find in terms of the excavations? And the approach, as Leigh sort of said earlier on, is that what we have to do is to try and get some sense of way of explain. It's not just a matter of finding stuff. It's actually instilling into the finders what the importance and what the relevance is of what they're finding. In other words, telling stories. And of course, one of the great stories is that object on the left-hand side there, a prison lighter. You don't have to go to an expert archaeologist to get details of a prison lighter. You go to the guys who actually use one of those, and you can see they gave you a precise date, not radiocarbon dated. They knew when smoking was banned in Erlestoke, 2016. So they were able to build up that story from going back earlier than 2016. Similarly, something as simple as a clay pipe, that image of somebody sitting down, relaxing, having a smoke, possibly a gardener, somebody that they could relate to, and actually put flesh on the bones of people who'd worked on that site maybe 200 or 300 years ago. All these things that actually create images in their mind. If you go back a little further, we can actually tell the story of the medieval. We had a shirt of medieval pottery there. That conjures up that idea of cooking, of eating. It's a process that we all have to do. A vision of domesticity, of people living in maybe a building in the local village of Erlestoke. And then going back further, a fragment of Romano-British pottery, a beaker, a drinking vessel. But we can link their findings in to the findings of Dennis Grant King in 63 and the findings there. It all starts linking that story together and actually combining it and giving them some sort of sense of achievement over what they're finding. But when they published the report of the Dennis Grant King excavations were published in 2002, the authors concluded any conclusions about the site's use in previous periods must remain tantalizing speculation. In other words, we could trace the history of Erlestoke from the Romano-British, the Iron Age and the Romano-British period, but what went before was a total blank. And I guess that's where I came in, because Leigh, of course, was anxious that the prisoners should learn about all aspects of archaeology, and that included the Stone Age. And so, Phil, can you come into the prison and tell them about flint tools? I was absolutely convinced that chances of them finding anything valid that I could put a story to from 17 test pits was pretty remote in the extreme. And so I equipped myself with a veritable arsenal of axes, daggers, knives, arrowheads, every weapon and utensil that you could come up with. And I was assured, yes, Phil, it's perfectly all right to take them in, provided at the end of it, you take them back out again. And so I made a big long list, and it was all vetted and what have you. And then just before I made the trip to Erlestoke, I thought maybe I ought to have a sneak preview of the finds to see if there was something there. I had planned to sort them blind in the prison with the prisoners and tell them, and I thought, no, maybe I ought to have a sneak preview to start with. And I looked in the first tray and I saw that. Now, that to me is a flint blade. You can see it's longer. It's a long, thin sliver of flint. And I thought to myself, that is a recognizable chipping of flint. I know how to make those. I know basically what they tell me. I can hang a story on that. So I then went to the next tray, and lo and behold, another one. And I was getting a little bit more excited about this. And then I went to another one and I found a blade core, the block from which those blades have been removed. And then I was really swinging. And then, well, that's what I ended up with. And you can see there is this consistent pattern, particularly here, of these long, thin blades, and then these blade cores that we have. And then here, one piece with a minute piece of retouch along here. We ended up with about 30 odd pieces of worked flint, but they were all that bluey colour, bluey grey colour. They were all sharing that blade technology, the characteristics of there. And basically, there's enough information there for me to suggest that that is probably a Mesolithic site, a Mesolithic spread. Material that was brought in sometime between the end of the last glaciation, 10,000 BC, and going right through to the first farmers about 4,000 BC. But perhaps if you've not actually, if to looking at that, you think, well, how are you going to get excited over about 30 pieces of grubby little flints? And so what I had to do was to try and actually instill some storyline to this. So I dropped back onto this age-old thing of small groups of people who were wandering around in the landscape that they knew, probably within a confined environment, exploiting raw materials, exploiting the animals that they were killing. And then, of course, I was able to bring in things into the discussion, things like the arrowheads, just trying to instill some life into the Mesolithic period and explaining how they would have enjoyed the environment, the geology and the ecosystem, and how they looked after our world for 6,000 years. But equally thinking that it's very, very easy to overlook the Mesolithic. And it really is, because so often the Mesolithic is represented by a small handful of grubby flints. And I know for a full well that if I go on an excavation, how the hell do I find a Mesolithic site with a 20-ton digger with a massive bucket and it scrapes off all the topsoil? And you've got to remember, all these flints at Erlestoke were basically in the topsoil and the subsoil. That's the stuff that traditionally you probably machine off. And then what happens? You find a few flints in later ditches, and it's so easy to be dismissive about the poor old Mesolithic. And this was the storyline that I had to try and get through, that they had actually found something that I regarded as being important, and I was hoping that they would share my passion for this. Little did I know what my words would how they would reverberate. So what I also had to do was to try and take these flints from Erlestoke and put them into a much broader context. Something that I know what to do, but they don't have the access to, is the opportunities to look into the computer archive. So I called up the Geological Survey, and here you can see the green in this colour is the Upper Greensand, and running down here there's the ridge of Upper Greensand. Here's the chalk, here's the clay vale. And I looked at the area between Pottern in the north and Westbury Broadley in the south, and I called up all the details on the Wiltshire Heritage Environment record, and I searched for Mesolithic, and you can see what I came up with. This pattern of about 16 sites, plus now our own one here, Erlestoke. And you can see how all these sites are clustered along the Upper Greensand Ridge. They do form a pattern, and how they also so many times relate to the drainage patterns we've got showing down these red dotted lines and the spring line all the way along here. Now, this is a pattern that you can replicate so many times in British archaeology, but the findings from Erlestoke allowed me to have a look and do this exercise for this one small patch of Wiltshire, and to actually, if you like, knock down the fences around Erlestoke prison and take the findings of Erlestoke out into the much wider landscape and really hammer home to these guys the importance of what they were doing and try to instill into them some sort of a sense of achievement. And because we wanted to see the whole project through, then I insisted, it was just standard practice, that what we would do was produce a formal report. And so I went in to the prison again and I sat down with the guys and discussed through with them what we would put into this report and how and what we might leave on out and how much we would synthesize the information and what the storyline would be. And so once I got all that agreement, I was able to put this text together, and that will appear as being accepted for the Wiltshire Archaeological magazine, which will be out, I hope, imminently. And again, it's something that we can give these prisoners a copy of their report and what they have achieved. And for a lot of them, this is probably one of the biggest achievements, the first time that they will have achieved something positive in their careers, in their lives. And then as part of this storyline of actually contributing to the report, I also asked them to select their favourite finds and also look for impacts and all the rest of it. And I got some very interesting responses from that. The one I did not expect, which really did blow me away and still really leaves me with a big lump in my throat, is this one. And it's a conversation between one of the prisoners, not with an archaeologist, but somebody who lived maybe 8,000 years ago. See what you think.
Mesolithic man, where have you been? What were you doing? What have you seen? Overlooked, overbuilt, discarded, forgotten. Mistaken as Neolithic, our treatment's been rotten. But now we've found you, and you've finally been seen. Well, we get excited over all that means. So we dig and we sift, we clean and we label. To make your story heard, we'll do all that we're able. Your story's brought hope to the darkest of places, a glimmer of light for forgotten faces.
Your story's brought hope to the darkest of places, a glimmer of light for forgotten faces. I think that is an amazing summary. So there you go. Big thank you to everybody listed there. And you can see from the QR code there, please do take the time to scan that and you'll be able to see the full version of Wessex Archaeology's Digging for Erlestoke video. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks both. What an amazing project. And I've still got my lump in the throat now from listening to that poem, because it was so amazing to see how archaeology benefits from that interaction, but more importantly, how the people have benefited from that interaction. It's made me really emotional, actually. Yeah.
It makes us emotional every time we hear it.
I can imagine every time we see that.
Yeah.
Poem is absolutely wonderful. I've had a small amount of experience of going into a Cat C prison because I live close to one, literally 500 yards up the road, to talk to some of the men there about archaeology, but not actually practicing archaeology. I've got a quick question before I go on to the questions that other people have posed. In terms of the staff that went in to do the digging, did you do any preparatory work before they went into that? Because I know that when I went in the first time, I had a long conversation with one of the prison officers. I know quite a lot of prison officers because they live in my village, about how some people find it a problem to be locked in when they're in there working and therefore can't go back in. So I just wondered if you'd done preparatory work before your team went in.
Yeah, I did, Gail, because as I said, I've run a few projects in Erlestoke Prison, and so I know the prison well. I've got security, so I can actually carry keys, which is a very useful thing to have. So I was able to give all of my colleagues who went into the prison a really good, honest explanation of what their experience might be and how they might feel. And you're absolutely right. For lots of people, that sense of being locked in and at the mercy of someone else who's carrying keys is quite peculiar.
But
How did
yeah,
you
I
find
mean,
it?
you've got form of
I've got
going in
form.
there.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, the first time, it was a somewhat daunting experience. And I think, I mean, now it's a lot easier.
Mm.
What is so much easier is is feeling comfortable with the guys that you're dealing with, because I think when I went in there, I was dealing with prisoners, criminals, basically, if you're not careful. And yet, when you get to know them,
They're just
they become your mates. They really do become your friends, and the warmth, the genuineness with which they welcome you. They shake you by the hand, and they really mean it, and they are genuinely grateful for you going in there.
But Gail, it's not for everybody. We
Yeah.
did have some colleagues who I said, "Would you like to do this?" And they said, "No, thank you," and that was absolutely fine. Everybody who took part in the project was there because they wanted to be there and they felt confident enough to be there. And every single person had nerves beforehand. And when you bring them out again, every single person said to me, "Can I go back?
Yeah.
Can I go back in again?"
Yeah.
It's such a two-way thing. I can't explain the experience of being inside and working with the
I
men.
mean, I think
It's very profound,
yeah,
really.
I mean, I think for us, the going in means that you can't always come
Come out.
out. Whereas for those guys, there is no coming out,
There's no
you
coming out.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Shall we move on to the first question? So we've got, how has this project influenced your thinking about developing and delivering other engagement projects in the future?
So that's my job, to do this kind of project. So where I'm constantly working on other projects of this time. Gail, you mentioned when you introduced me kindly at the beginning, we've got a big social prescribing project that's now in its fourth year here in Salisbury, called Well City Salisbury, and we're working with people with mental health needs. In terms of doing more work in prisons, we've got a really good blueprint now. We've got a really good framework, which we would need to condense, because 18 months actually isn't sustainable. But we're now looking at working with the prison and seeing if we could do something very similar, but over a shorter period of time. But there is learning to be taken away from every single thing that we do. I'm a very reflective person, and one of the things, actually, David Kendall, again, my friend who does lots of work in Erlestoke, said to me is, "What's changed in you?" And so that's always a question that I ask myself at the end of every project. What's changed in me? What is the difference in me? And I use the answer to that to put into my next project, into my next piece of learning. So
I,
it's ongoing. It's ongoing, I
I
think.
mean, for somebody who has, well, I have spent all my life in archaeology, and you think you've probably touched on every experience that is possible to do. There ain't many types of sites that I haven't dug up at some stage or another. But I'll tell you what, I've never been on a project like that. There is still new ground to break. And even after all these years, there is still some, yeah, genuinely, you can turn around and say, Stone me, that was a seriously good project to be part of. You know, you can get what you like. Archaeology is just such a wonderful thing. It really is. And it really does. It can just excite people and ignite people. And provided it's done properly, I mean, it's not a game to me. I take it very, very seriously. It's what I've spent all my life doing. But if you can do it with a smile on your face and you can put something positive back into those people like that,
Yeah,
then that's an added
absolutely.
bonus. It really is.
Which kind of ties in with one of the questions that's come in. It says, do you think any of the inmates will go into a career in archaeology?
They really wanted to. So three of the younger guys who were released during our project, they were all interested in apprenticeships. So I was able to take in information about that. Yes, I hope so. One of our other guys who was released as a slightly older guy in his 50s, he was adamant that he was going to leave and go and look for some voluntary work to do. But you know, when the men leave prison, life is still hard. They've got to go back in, they've got to kind of reclimatize into society, they've got to get back in with their friends and family. So I really do hope that they can take the feeling that they had from being part of our project and harness that and do something on the outside. I'm very hopeful for them. I'll never know. I'll probably never ever know, and that's okay. I think the important thing is that we gave them that moment and we showed them the possibilities of what could be, and I hope they take it and run.
Yeah, I feel somewhat frustrated that you can't harvest that enthusiasm. I mean, I'd love to be able to take those guys to Stonehenge. I'd love to be able to stick them into a minibus and take them to Stonehenge. And I know that's not possible.
Yeah.
And that I find it so frustrating.
And this ties in with one of the other questions that's come in. Leigh, you said just then, you'll probably never know what some of the outcomes will be because of the length of time that the inmates are in there or where they've gone into the rest of the world. So the question was, are there any plans to evaluate the long-term impact of the programme? And I guess you can evaluate some of those things, but you can't evaluate an awful lot of it because it'll be unknown.
It is unknown, and it's not appropriate either for us to contact the men that have been released. You know, they have their lives to lead now, and you know, they're building their lives back up again. We are still very connected to the prison. I'm going in again in a few months' time. I like to give the men updates. You know, Phil and I will go in and we'll tell them we've done this. They will be interested to know that you guys that have joined us on screen this evening are interested in their project. In fact, they're blown away by that. They're blown away that people have read the article in British Archaeology magazine or that they'll watch the film on YouTube. So, you know, our connection with Erlestoke Prison is by no means over. They are friends for life, for sure. And, you know, in years to come, some of the guys who did our project are still going to be in there, and we will always have that connection to them.
I had a couple of questions about funding. So the first one was, can you say something more about the funding and how the project fitted organisationally into Wessex Archaeology? And I think I saw further down there was a question about what percentage of it was funded by HLF.
So we got 116,000 from Heritage Lottery Fund, and there was match funding put into the project from Wessex and from Erlestoke Prison as well. And what was the first question, Gail, about the organisation bit?
How it fitted into organisationally into Wessex Archaeology.
So, as I said in my intro, you know, we are a charity, we're a registered charity, and our vision is about using archaeology to make a better world and to make archaeology accessible for everybody, you know, through respect and care and access. You know, they're the things that are really important to us. So actually, there was never any question. You know, nobody higher up the food chain at Wessex questioned this project or said, Leigh, I don't think so. This doesn't quite fit in with our remit. Everyone has been so incredibly positive and supportive and absolutely 100% behind the project. You know, members of our senior leadership team have come with me into Erlestoke Prison and have delivered sessions for the men. You know, those 34 colleagues are from so many teams across the organisations. And I think that itself actually, Gail, demonstrates what it means to us as an organisation and how we all wanted to have a part and to be involved in it.
I'm going to switch now to a question about archaeology. It's one directly for you, Phil. Why would flints be found in the top levels of the earth as opposed to deeper down?
Sorry?
Why would the flint
I'm as
be
deaf
found
as a
in the
post.
top
I'm as
upper
deaf as a
levels?
post. This is the trouble.
Why would flints be found in the top levels of Earth as opposed to deeper down?
What? Well, I mean, what we found in at Erlestoke in our bit was that whereas the Dennis Grant King, that all that archaeology had been reworked and by later development where they probably started building the thing. I guess where we were digging, what had happened was that it might have been slightly ploughed or what have you in the Roman period. But of course, during the medieval period, so much of Wiltshire was laid over to sheep farming and what have you. It doesn't get disturbed. And of course, then by the 18th century, it becomes part of the formal grounds and all the rest of it. It doesn't get turned over. And all the flints that are in there, for a start, they're going to be on the top, so they're going to be on the surface where when people make the flints, they drop them on the surface. Earthworms and roots and all the rest of it will move those artifacts, those objects down through the soil, and they then settle out at a lower level. So, and then at the same time, you've also got soil material building up on the top of it. So that's effectively the mechanism that's happening. You probably find that all the flints were in the lower part of the topsoil. You go through, you don't find anything because they've all migrated down through and they settle out. Is that the gist of the answer that you were hoping for?
That was the
No.
question. I think you answered it really in great detail. I think, judging by the number of comments that are coming through, it's going to be, I can't ask all the questions, but the thrust of the questions are generally to do with, is this going to be a continuing programme? Can it be delivered in other settings? Was it incorporated into other learning, so numeracy or literacy programmes within the prison? You know, a lot of people are clearly inspired by this and think more of this should be going on. How can that be enabled?
So the answer to all of those questions is yes, yes, and yes. So we will be doing more in the prison. It was used in other aspects of prison life. The education department kind of picked it up and ran with it. And if you watch the longer film, you'll see Elizabeth Williams talking about that and how that comes to be. And we've got a really good framework now, haven't we? We've tried this project. We know what's worked. We've done really good evaluation. We've had the experience, we've reflected on it, and I think we do have a model for engaging other communities with archaeology in this kind of way. And when I say other communities, I do mean those harder to reach communities, people like prisoners, young offenders. And it'd be great to do something with young offenders and get in there at the prevent stage, as opposed to the stage where the guys in Erlestoke are, they're already in there. So I think there's lots and lots of possibility, Gail, for what we could do. What we could do with this work. I think really this is the tip of the iceberg, and I'm still processing it. I've got to be honest with you. The project finished. It ran for a lot longer than we thought it would, and it finished kind of midway through last year. And I'm still working out what happened and what did we learn and what do we do next.
It is so easy when somebody is put in prison that you think to yourself, you lock them up, you throw away the key, and to hell with them, let them stay there. But you have to give them a chance. Some of them do need a chance, and it takes a bit of effort. But I'll tell you what, when you go in there and you give them that chance, the gratitude that you can get out of that opportunity, and you just have to hope that what you are giving to them, they will give back to you when they come out by being reasonably good citizens, and they won't go back into prison. It won't work for everybody. It won't work for everybody, but for goodness sake, give them a chance.
Yeah.
What you've just said completely concurs with a conversation that I had with another curator elsewhere, who was also going to. I'd done some work in a prison, and she was asked if she would do the same, and she said, "I don't know if I should give them my time." And the thing is, it was about being a human, and the way that the system works, and it is about rehabilitation for a lot of these people, and you do have to give them a chance, and you've used archaeology in such an amazing way to give them a chance. I am going to draw this session to a close now. There were lots of questions that I apologise if your question was not asked, but there was so much response to that, and I think clearly showing that there was a desire for more of this kind of thing to be done by other people and potentially by Wessex in the future. If you've enjoyed our talk, Jamie, my colleague, in return for the talk, is going to pop in to the chat a link for an evaluation questionnaire, because that's what we ask for in return. And clearly, if you've enjoyed the lecture, Council for British Archaeology brings these lectures to everybody free of charge. If you'd like to support the work that we do, if you could make a donation, there'll also be a link in the chat just there. And then finally, obviously this is part of a series of lectures. So the next This is Archaeology lecture is This is Archaeology, Basque, Oak and Portuguese Wine. A medieval merchant ship reveals her secret, with Toby Jones. And that's from the other side of the water from where I'm sitting, as he's the curator of the Newport Ship Project. And that's on Thursday, the 1st of May. And there'll be a link that will be provided to that in the chat. And if you can't find that link, obviously all of the information about this series is available on the Council for British Archaeology's website. So without further ado, I'm going to thank you. Amazing response in the chat for people saying what a wonderful project and how well that's come across to them through the time that you spent with us tonight, Leigh, and to Phil. So thank you on behalf of all the audience. There were over 200 people. You can tell the prisoners over 200 people that
We'll do
logged in
that
tonight.
They'll be so pleased to hear that. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Take good
Okay
care.
then.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.